Hey, what is going on, guys? Lanh here from Android Authority. So a lot of OEMs have been making bezels thinner and thinner on smartphones these days, mostly because phones are getting larger, and thinner bezels definitely do help, and also because bezels really aren't that attractive either. But no one has yet to create a truly bezel-less smartphone. But Sharp, a company that no one has really expected, has gotten pretty close. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the Sharp Aquos Crystal. So this is the Sharp Aquos Crystal, and let's get the boring stuff out of the way first. On the right side of the phone, you're going to find nothing. It's completely blank. On the left is a volume rocker up and down, and along the top is a 3.5mm headset jack with your power button. And finally on the bottom is a micro USB port and a microphone. Now, Sharp is not a company you really think about when it comes to smartphones, but the Aquos Crystal caught a lot of people's eye because the front of the phone has practically no bezels, with the exception of the bottom chin, which is the sacrifice they had to make in order to achieve this mostly bezel-less design. So because there's no forehead or top bezel, whatever you want to call it, all of the usual stuff that you would find at the top of the phone has been moved to the bottom. So this includes your front-facing camera and your notification LED light. And because the front-facing camera is at the bottom, when you try to take a selfie, it actually tells you to turn the phone upside down so you're not at such a weird angle when you take a photo. Even with this bottom chin, the overall design actually looks pretty sharp. It's somewhat of an amazing feat and something you have to see in person to truly appreciate. Even with a 5-inch display, this phone feels really small and compact because of the bezel-less top and sides, so it's really easy to hold and operate in one hand, which you can't say about too many phones these days. When holding the Aquos Crystal in your hand and using it, you'll also notice that there's a slight bevel around the edge of the glass, which makes for a very smooth and seamless experience when you're swiping across the edge of the display. The back of the phone is removable, giving you access to your SIM card and micro SD slot, but the battery is completely sealed in, so you won't be able to swap batteries or anything. Also on the back is the single speaker, and it's nothing impressive. It's kind of quiet and the quality isn't all that great. Because of the lack of bezel, you might have noticed on the top there's actually no earpiece, but phone calls are still possible, and from the way Sharp has explained it, it actually uses a digital wave receiver, which actually vibrates the entire front panel, and those vibrations are interpreted by your ear as sound. So when you're on a phone call, you actually don't have to put your ear anywhere in specific. As long as it's somewhere along the display, you'll actually be able to hear the person on the other end just fine. And it actually works surprisingly well, and the sound quality is actually not too bad either. Like I mentioned earlier, the Sharp Aquos Crystal has a 5-inch display. It's a 720p display, and it falls just short of 300 ppi, so it's a pretty average mid-range display because after all, that's what this phone is. I do notice a slightly pink tint to the display, and it's mostly noticeable on white backgrounds, but otherwise it's a decent looking panel with a good amount of saturation and contrast, and the viewing angles are pretty good too. Because of those thin bezels, watching videos and playing games on the Aquos Crystal created for a much more immersive experience. It almost felt as if you could see more of what you were looking at because the content practically goes edge to edge. And even though this screen is only 5 inches, the thin bezels make it very enjoyable to consume media on. The performance of the Aquos Crystal is decent at best. It's being powered by some pretty typical mid-range specs. It's a Snapdragon 400, Adreno 305, and 1.5 gigs of RAM. For basic things like swiping, scrolling, opening up apps, texting, and browsing the web, it performs okay, but it's very easy to slow this phone down if you're trying to do a lot of multitasking or gaming, which results in a lot of stutters and drop frames. Touchscreen responsiveness can also be an issue at times, especially when typing, but if I had to sum it up, the performance isn't terrible, but it's not great either. It's sort of somewhere in the middle. On the back of the Aquos Crystal, you're going to find an 8 megapixel sensor with LED flash, and the software when you first fire up the camera appears very simple and clean, until you hit that little up arrow that reveals a ton of different settings from panorama, HDR, and a bunch of various different scene modes and filters made specifically for taking photos of people, food, and objects. So the software offers a lot to play with here, and you can really tailor your shot to anything that you're taking a photo of. Even with the slew of options and shooting modes, the picture quality is pretty terrible, to be honest. Photos are muddy, details are very soft, and they're filled with a lot of noise even in good lighting. Colors look extremely washed out, and HDR actually makes photos look worse. It does bring out more detail and brightens up the image, but any sort of color and contrast that the image might have had gets lost in the process. It's a camera filled with a lot of nice options, but the picture quality is lackluster to say the least. The battery life has not been the greatest, at least in my experience. It's a 2040 milliamp hour battery, so it's a pretty small battery, and I found myself having a really hard time making it through a full day, even when I was connected to Wi-Fi. And even with light usage, I only managed to get between 2.5 to 3 hours of screen on time. So the battery life could use a lot of work. And like I mentioned earlier, the battery is not removable, so you can't swap batteries, which is unfortunate. With the software, the Aquos Crystal is running a basically stock build of Android 4.4 KitKat, but there is a few software additions from Sharp. Some of them add to the overall experience, and then there's some that don't really change the way you use the phone, but they are cool features nonetheless. So one, you have Harman Kardon's Clarify audio built in, but it doesn't work with the internal speaker. It only works with earbuds and Bluetooth devices like a Bluetooth speaker, but to me it's nothing more than a fancy equalizer, so it's not really anything special. The second feature is called Clip Now, and this basically just makes it easier to take a screenshot. Instead of having to hold down any hardware buttons, you can simply swipe across the top of the display to take a screenshot. The last feature is Frame Effect, and this doesn't add a whole lot of utility to the phone, but it is a cool effect to just play around with, so you can have the screen glow or flash when an alarm goes off or when you plug the phone into charge. You can also make the screen glow around the edges of the glass every time you turn the phone on. Again, it's not really all that useful, but it does look cool, and it's a feature that really takes advantage of the bezel-less design. But other than that, it's a practically stock Android experience, so great job by Sharp for not trying to do too much with Android. The Sharp Aquos Crystal is a prepaid phone, and you can pick it up right now for $150. It's a CDMA phone, so it works on carriers like Sprint, Boost, and Virgin Mobile, which are all basically Sprint anyways, and it is compatible with Sprint's LTE Spark network. For $150, this is a really solid smartphone, and if you're on a budget, it is a great option to consider. It's running a practically stock build of Android, and it has a very refreshing and new design with the thin bezels, and hopefully this is going to be something we see more often, whether it's from Sharp or another OEM. The battery life could be a little bit better, but for $150, you really can't go wrong here. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching this review of the Sharp Aquos Crystal. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up down below, and also subscribe to the channel, which is also down below, and make sure to check out the website. You already know what it is, AndroidAuthority.com, for more in-depth coverage, because we are your source for all things Android.